Here Dr. Heigo Ritsbek, Cardinal of the Holy Catholic Church International, and we are in the series of lectures about the Church, and now we are looking at the sacrament of the Eucharist in our second lecture about Eucharist. We want to see in the Eucharist as New Covenant Passover. Then we go to the nature of the Mass, and of course finally our proper response to this. When we take the Eucharist as Passover, then we really have to go into the Old Testament and to see how actually the Mass and the Passover are connected with each other. And we at the same time see how much is there a connection between Christ's sacrifice on Calvary and the Eucharist. They are actually one piece. So we cannot even divide these two into several pieces. You can't find all scripture scholars agreeing on anything these days, but at the same time it's very clear that the Eucharist and Calvary are connected with each other. When we think about how Christ instituted the Eucharist, then we certainly have to go to the upper room, and these are well-known facts. And Jesus and the disciples were celebrating together a very well-known feast, the Passover. Yeah, probably it was the most important feast of all feasts in Christian calendar. In the Jewish calendar. And it signaled the event, it signified the salvation deed of God, the work of God. And we know that centuries, over 1,000 years before, when Moses and the 12 tribes of Israel found themselves in bondage down in Egypt, and then we know the story how God called Moses from the burning bush and gave to him commandments to go to the Pharaoh and let his people go. What is very interesting also that God told to Moses, "Go and tell Pharaoh the following: Israel is my firstborn son." Israel is my firstborn son. God is saying something to Egypt and to all other nations here. You are enslaving and ignoring and mistreating your eldest brother. It almost implies that all the nations in God's eyes are like sons, but that Israel back then held sort of primacy like the oldest brother. Israel is my firstborn son. Go tell Pharaoh that Israel is my firstborn son. Let him go to serve me, or else I will slay your firstborn sons. And you know the story about the plagues and all later what happened in Egypt, and how Pharaoh kept hardening and turning away from God and didn't listen until the 10th plague came, which was a plague of the angel of death visiting death upon the firstborn sons in Egypt. Yeah, all firstborn sons would have died, not just the Egyptian firstborn sons, except for one thing, the Passover. If you and your household through the father took a lamb and slew that lamb and sprinkled the blood on the doorpost and ate the meal, you would wake up and your firstborn son would be alive. And of course, the Egyptian families didn't do this, the Israel families did, and with that they were brought up in the Exodus out of Egypt to Mount Sinai, where God made a covenant with them, where he, like a father, entered into a loving relationship with his son. It's almost like a bridal, it's like a marriage encounter. Sometimes we forget this very important detail in this, that when the angel of death visited Egypt, then the angel of death simply didn't bypass or didn't enter the households of Israelites because they were Israelites. So anyway, like somebody wants to say, okay, the angel of death knew where to go and where not to go, but there was a sign. There was a very important sign. So the Hebrews in Egypt were not saved, the firstborns were not saved by this, that they were simply Hebrews, or they were simply people who were firstborn sons of God. But even they had to do something to live. They had to have a Passover and put the blood of the lamb on the doorposts. And I really think that this brings to us a very important component of this whole Eucharistic issue. This means what we do, what God requires from us in a certain times. It's not automatic. Moses didn't tell the Hebrews, don't worry, we are protected, we are special son of God, and the Egyptians will suffer. No, they had to do something. God had given them a specific task, and it was Passover. And that's the Old Testament background. That it meant was a covenant event. Covenant is a very important topic in the Bible, and if we had more time, then we were able to go into all these covenant issues much more deeply. But the Passover was a bonding agent that brought it about through the blood of the lamb, the sacrifice. And these are already given the basic characters or characteristics of the Mass we will be talking after a while. And so it was celebrated for thousands of years and still is by Jews as the sign of Mosaic covenant. This is the covenant of Moses. This is nothing unusual. And now remember, a covenant is a sacred family bond. It's more than a contract. So many people don't understand, and they mix these two terms, these two very important words, contract and covenant. Covenant is a sacred family bond. It is more than a contract. And remember that firstborn sons were marked for destruction. In other words, Egypt offered up a sacrifice, and so did Israel. Egypt's sacrifice was unwilling, their firstborn sons. Israel's sacrifice was voluntary, the unblemished lamb. All of this is key to understand the New Testament context of the Last Supper and our own Holy Eucharist. Because when Christ institutes the Eucharist, it takes place in the upper room at the Last Supper. And this is not, again, a non-important issue. Jesus didn't institute the Eucharist nowhere else, but in the context of the Last Supper, which was Jewish Passover also. They are connected with each other so much. Luke 22:15 says, I have earnestly desired to eat this Passover with you. And so likewise in Mark chapter 14, his disciples said to him, where will you have us go and prepare for you to eat the Passover? And he gave them very specific instructions, where to go, how to go, and when to go. And then they had their Passover meal together. I really think that these elements, what I just described, and these small things are putting together a real wonderful understanding why the Mass, why the Eucharist is so important. And it puts on it even much more importance.